Natalia Rachel is an author, trauma-informed educator, and human intelligence specialist. She shares her voice to begin to remedy the world's state of hustle, trauma, and disconnect. A proud recipient of the Women Icons Asia Awards, Natalia also launched her highly anticipated book, Why Am I Like This, last year. That's the book that she'll be giving 3 copies away today. Natalia brings a wealth of knowledge from years working as a therapist and clinic director with a focus on trauma and abuse recovery, as well as her own personal journey recovering from mental health misdiagnosis and physical health conditions that stemmed from childhood trauma. She's currently focused on social impact and culture transformation through speaking, consulting, and teaching. Her goal is to bring trauma work to the mainstream and to bridge the gap between mental health, diversity, equity, inclusion, and human sustainability. Natalia will be debunking the myths around trauma, as well as helping you identify areas of your life that may be holding you back without you even realizing. Using practical activities to connect with parts of your life that might have trauma, Natalia will help you reclaim your power to communicate your needs and boundaries with loving kindness, compassion, and firmness. This is very exciting for me because I've actually been like a huge fan of her before I met her for the first time at an event. And I'm so excited to bring up Natalia! Hello! Hello!
How are you?
I'm doing so good. So you'll be giving also 3 books away, which I'm very excited about. Yeah. So I've given you the formal introduction, but introduce yourself to the audience.
Hi everyone, my name's Natalia Rachel, and everything that I do is about helping us to better understand the nature of trauma and develop pathways to healing for ourselves and also for each other.
What led you to becoming a trauma-informed educator? You said it's a lot by experience, your past experience as well. So could you share a story that is monumental in you deciding to do this work?
I often refer to myself as a patient turned therapist. So what led me to this vocation or line of work is my own experience of many, many years, decades trying to heal and not really understanding what was wrong with me. And so I was asking myself, why am I like this? What's wrong? Why can't I be the woman that I feel like I am deep down inside and that I want to be? And I looked through every single lens trying to figure it out because I really wanted to heal. I really wanted to be me. And it wasn't until I looked through the lens of trauma that I began to heal. And then that healing journey itself was very epic, very textured. And once I healed, there were people just naturally coming up to me saying, hey, I'm going through something similar to what you went through. I see that you figured it out. Can you help me? And I thought, well, I think I can, but I better go and study. And so I've studied many different modalities and began to work in this field.
So I want to dive into what trauma is. I mean, it's such a big word. Sometimes I'm afraid to even use it. It's kind of like the word depression. It's like if you're not clinically diagnosed, can I even say that I'm feeling depressed? It's like these words that I'm afraid to use sometimes. So I want to kind of dive deeper into what exactly is trauma.
Trauma is when a past experience of threat that's over is living and breathing in us now. And it can affect us mentally, emotionally, physiologically, and also relationally or dynamically. It's largely unconscious, non-verbal, and it's felt. It's somatic in nature, so it shows up in the whispers of the body and as emotions, sensations, and relating patterns, and it travels through relationships, communities, and cultures. And I think it's also really important to understand that trauma is not a past event. It's actually how the past has been left unmetabolized inside us and goes on to create changes in the way we perceive, express, and relate.
I feel like I needed to take a moment to just like soak in that definition because there's so many parts about it. Like the fact that it will pass down to generations and to culture, and the part of decontextualizing, right? The importance of understanding what that is, which we'll dive deeper into. And this is a highly I don't know if I would call this a complex issue.
Trauma is deeply complex.
Yes.
It is created through many different pathways or dimensions, and it lives and breathes in this very multi-dimensional way.
Yeah.
And then when we add in the context of time, and then we add in all of our survival and adaptive mechanisms, it becomes really diffuse and hard to spot. And that's why so many people are walking around with unresolved trauma, not knowing that it's there. And it's why we continue to create cycles of oppression and exclusion and just discord, because the trauma is leaking and spreading and we're really not aware of it.
I want to actually ask, you mentioned that it's hard to spot. But what are some ways in which we can identify that someone may have unresolved trauma? How does it show up?
So I always recommend that we look at these 3 different dimensions or realms. So the first one is our mental health and our emotional health. So if we have symptoms of mental health, whether they be around depression or anxiety or fluctuating, swinging emotional states or emotional volatility, if there's no clear root cause in the present, it's likely that it may be trauma decontextualizing from the past into the present. So when we have those experiences and they don't make sense, and we can't sort of heal it or fix it in a very topical, practical way, it's likely that there's trauma at play. Similarly in the body, if we're experiencing physical sensations like pain or really strange shifts in our markers of physical health, so for example gut issues or migraines, if there's no ability to sort of sort them out with practical, topical ways, again, it may be that it's something from the past and it's speaking through the body. And that was my story. You know, I was very, very sick for a very long time because I didn't know how to listen to the somatic language of trauma, and neither did the many, many doctors that were trying very hard to help me, but without this context. And the last way that it shows up, which again, there's not that much information out there on, is relationally or dynamically. So when we are holding unresolved trauma, and particularly relational trauma, so for example, maybe we've grown up in a volatile home environment, or we've experienced abuse or oppression or poverty or all of these different traumatic things, when it's unhealed inside us, we may tend to have emotional outbursts. We may tend to get triggered a lot by people, and that can cause us either to become aggressive or passive aggressive, or to completely shut down and not speak up, or to feel super confused in relationships. And it may be as subtle as just feeling like not really feeling connected, like there are all these people around and I'm in relationships, but it doesn't feel quite right. So these are all signs of unresolved trauma as well.
And I see the importance of being able to pause away from the hustle and just listen to our body, because hints like that are hard to notice when we're so focused on the doing and the hustle of things. And I think what you mentioned about how it's so important to heal, and your phrase is literally heal your trauma, change the world. Before we go into audience questions, I want to ask, why did that phrase come about? Why is it so important to heal your trauma? And how may it pass on if you don't?
When we're walking around with unresolved trauma inside us, everything that we put into the world and every dynamic we have will be tainted or affected by that trauma. And so that might be the way we relate with our partner, it might be the way we parent our child, it might be the way we lead a team. It might be the way we treat someone on the street or someone working in a restaurant. And so I really believe that when we learn to contain our trauma first and then to heal it, we stop perpetuating continued cycles of disrespect and exclusion. So to me, trauma healing work is social impact work.
When you put it in that context, it makes it so important to heal our trauma. Because otherwise, we're going to have to, the only way to not affect others is stay at home all day. But we are going to meet people, we are going to do work outside, and it's so important to heal our own trauma so it doesn't pass on.
And I think it's not only about healing our trauma, it's about standing up and being in support and service of helping others to heal. So trauma is a human issue, and even if we don't identify as having it, we are relating with someone who is holding unresolved trauma. And I think there are these points in our own healing journey where we feel a bit more peaceful, a bit more powerful, and have a bit more capacity and resource. And when we reach those points, we can show up as the human that heals and begins to bring other people to the other side.
You know, when Audrey asked about giving someone a chance and even dating and relationships, I feel like the culture of dating is to put up your best self. And sometimes even the thought of talking about something that you would see as a flaw, trauma as a flaw, like even seeing that, perceiving that, like not having it together is so scary because we're taught to put out our best self, we're taught to have it all together. How do you know if someone is worth that trust in you showing your vulnerable side?
Dating in this day and age is really very tricky, and part of that's because we have commoditized relationships and love. So if you think about the online dating world these days, we are turning ourselves into products, and we're actually putting ads out there saying, hey, pick me.
I'm literally getting goosebumps.
Yeah, and we're looking at other people's ads and we're like, no, maybe. And then we get into this phase of testing, right? On a first date, we're actually interviewing each other. So we have turned love into a business.
Wow.
And so number one, that's a really scary paradigm shift. It's really scary.
Yeah.
So the first thing is to become aware of what we're doing. We're commoditizing love, and love isn't meant to be a transaction. So we can, number one, consciously pull ourselves out of that. We do want to dip our toes into the waters of vulnerability. So once we stop performing and we stop testing how well other people perform, we can actually get a little bit real. But of course, we don't want to say, here's my 50,000 traumas right away. Do you want to love me? Want to move in? You know, that's going to scare someone off, and rightly so. That's a big dating red flag. But we can learn to let our barriers to connection, which are all survival responses, down slowly. And so it might be first about tuning into how responsive and receptive is this person. Do they do what they say they're going to do? Do they show up? And then you might just drop a little bit of information and see, how is this received? Is it received with respect? Is it received with compassion? Is it remembered? And again, trust takes time. So we can dip our toes in and take our toes out and just wait and see. And when we're dating and building relationships, the most important thing is about how somebody treats us, not what their profile says or what car they drive or whether we think they're hot. So we have to come away from this commoditization and really start to meet each other and learn about each other. And another piece is that with trauma, it can be really hard, because when we're holding unresolved trauma, we tend to hold a sense of urgency inside us. So we meet someone and their profile looks really good and they tick all these boxes, and then we're like, gonna go right in, I'm gonna get it. And when we do that, we go into what's known as projection, and we miss all of the red flags. And that's how we end up in unhealthy or harmful relationships. So we need to learn to go slow and sit with those feelings of threat and unlink them.
It's almost like when we go for that urgency, we put them on that pedestal, like they're this amazing person, and we don't allow ourselves to observe the potential red flags or the potential lack misalignment in values. Like that kind of goes out the window because we think they're hot, right? Or they check our boxes.
We've all done it. We've all done it.
Asian.
This one's a shiny one.
Yeah. It's like, I mean, I feel like it's very Asian to have a checklist. I don't know, once again, if it's just an Asian thing, but
It's not just an Asian thing.
Just generally speaking, it's like have a checklist and, check it down. So then the question would be, how do you then balance between identifying if someone is a right partner in the long term, just based on like common values and alignment, versus like, let me just put the question back. How do you know if the person is right for you, especially if you don't know their trauma yet? How do you identify when you first meet them? What are the things you can ask to identify if this person is like worth going on a second date with?
I mean, again, I think we need to stop rushing it. When we meet someone on the first date, we don't know automatically whether they're good for us or not. Relationships take time. I believe it takes about 6 months to really get to know someone's personality, and it takes about 2 years to know somebody's character. So it's not until you've gone through some difficult times together that you learn how well this person does in survival and whether they're going to support you when there's a conflict of interest. So again, we try to like lock everybody down, and that comes from our own insecurity and it comes from our own trauma. The other thing that happens in terms of relationships in trauma is that we will either replay past harmful dynamics or we'll run in the opposite direction. So we'll go one of two extreme routes. So for example, if we've had an abusive parent, we might end up in a relationship where we're being abused. So we've all had those friends, right? They end up in shitty relationship after shitty relationship, excuse my language. But on the other hand, we might run in the other direction, which is we've had this volatile upbringing and we choose the safe person. We choose the safe person who's never going to hurt us. But it's not actually because we are attracted to them or we have points of resonance. It's because our trauma is saying, run, get something opposite. And so if we want to have healthy relationships and we have past trauma, we do really need to come back to do that healing work. And it also happens through the journey. So I think dating is a bit like an experiment when you're holding unresolved trauma. You actually have to see what's going to be triggered in me now and how can I contain it and how can I not create yet another bad or unhelpful dynamic. And when we do that, there's a lot more ease and play, which is also very healing. It doesn't have to be so difficult.
It's insane to me how you say it. Like you mentioned, it can be like play, right? But it's hard to know that you would be triggered. It's much easier to just stick with the plan and stay safe and not get triggered.
But that is survival. And so a lot of our blocks to intimacy and love and relationships are actually unresolved trauma, and they're protective mechanisms that at one time kept us safe, but end up becoming the blocks to what we want, which is connection and intimacy and love. And so when we can illuminate all the funny relationship stuff we have, and we're even very good at twisting it in our minds and saying, oh, we've got fierce boundaries, actually you're blocking yourself from a connection. And so once we illuminate them, we can begin to test, well, is it safe for me to bring this protective mechanism down? And so again, that's about dipping our toes or our fingers in really slowly. And so patience is really important.
It seems to me that what we need to do to achieve happiness is to first start with healing our trauma. Otherwise, we'll be afraid to dream big. We'll be afraid to go for someone that we really, really want to be with because we're afraid of being hurt. So it all comes back to wanting to heal that trauma.
I believe that the task of our generation is to heal our trauma so that the next generation doesn't have to. So this is my very deep spiritual belief.
I think this really puts things in perspective, how far it can go back. And it almost gives, or at least for me, a permission to know that if I haven't got it all figured out, it's okay. There's a lot to work through. And it gives that permission of like, hey, it takes time and it's okay to take time. It's okay to be 40 and still have trauma you're working through. And I like what you mentioned about maybe having a conversation with our parents. For me, I think that having multiple conversations with my parents has helped me a lot understand what's holding me back. So having deeper conversations with my dad and him telling me that he never really had a close relationship with his parents, and the relationship with his parents is very much, they don't share much about themselves. They're there to instruct. They're there to bring money and food to the table. And so he has always found that conversations with his friends were always very shallow, with other men especially, and they find it hard to dig deeper and dive into deeper conversation. So knowing that from him also made me realize that, this is why, like, when I was growing up, I always felt like it was hard to have deeper conversations with my dad, and that he would just tell me what to do. And I think it was that mechanism, that protective mechanism for me to go like, no, I want my own autonomy. I don't want you to tell me, what you want me to do. And I kind of protected myself. And it's crazy because I think he was protecting himself and I'm protecting myself. And our relationship only improved when both of us were open to have deeper conversations with each other. And now my relationship with him is so much better because I was willing to have that deeper conversation, and he was willing to have that deeper conversation and have that human to human conversation as opposed to like dad and daughter. And I think that there's so much power in having conversation with our family members.
I think being curious about somebody's why and about our own why is what allows us to actually connect and learn about each other. And it's really important for us all at every stage of our lives.
Yeah, and I think it's you even shine a light on how important it is to not just celebrate ourselves but also do the inner work. I think both are important. I feel like sometimes we need to have more fun and play. So it's doing the inner work, doing the healing of the trauma, but also allowing ourselves to have fun and play and celebrate ourselves. So I think both ends are so important.
Some of us might find one easier than the other. So for me, I found crying much easier than being joyful. But
Wow.
I found as we embrace the healing journey, our emotions exist on this spectrum, and it's a bit like the swing of the pendulum. So when we allow ourselves to sort of sit with our pain, we will most commonly experience that the things that we find joyful become even more intensified and pleasurable. And in the end, healing is about increasing our capacity for aliveness, to feel everything and to be okay with everything. So I believe I'll always be healing. The level of what I have lived through is very severe. But to me, it's all held with such compassion. So I may have trauma, but I'm not traumatized because I can hold it with such love.
I think this brings us nicely to wrap up. And I want to ask you, like, how can we bring speaking to the part of us that's afraid to speak up? How do we reconnect with that part in our everyday life? Are there practices that you would recommend for us to take home?
I think when we're healing from trauma, parts work is really important. We all have many parts. When it comes to the part of us that didn't speak up, we want to know what stories it's holding and make space to listen to those stories. We also want to know what are the kinds of things that trigger that fear. And it might be certain situations or certain people. And so once we get clear on the kinds of triggers that cause us to quiet and close our voice, we can, number one, prepare when we're going to enter those things, and the preparation might already preempt everything and just have a really quick shift. But similarly, when we find ourselves in those situations, we can actually tune in the moment when we feel our voice closing down or we're losing our words, and we can actually just tune and say, hey, I'm here.
Wow.
And to just be with changes everything. For most of us, these parts of ourselves are very young and they've emerged in our formative years, so 0 to 7 for most of us. So they're little kids. And so part of the journey of healing and learning to speak up is called reparenting. And it's actually taking our inner child, or these parts of us. I believe we have many inner children. We have to take them by the hand and say, hey, I got you. And again, it's this repeated experience of showing these parts of ourselves that are actually terrified that nothing bad is going to happen, and that we're not only going to protect them, but we're going to take them towards the beautiful life that we deserve.
Thank you so much for sharing your journey with us and bringing us through such a vulnerable practice that we can do for ourselves at home too. And with that, all in this like vulnerable space now, and also like scanning the QR code. And with that, I think Natalia will see some of you maybe at the program, but do also follow on Instagram and on LinkedIn. She shares really easy to listen to snippets on understanding more about trauma and how it's showing up in our life. And I have benefited so much just from reading your insights. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Thank you.